Um, what would I hope are some things you might be thinking about? And I am hoping I can get this to work. I'm going to share the screen and share a video that was done when I was, and it's dated, you guys. It's from 19, uh, oh boy, it's from like 1982. I was in between um, medical, finishing up college, applying to medical schools, and I had an experience working in Harlem in a school, and this is a one day well. Nancy was in a short that was nominated for an Oscar. Like when you become an associate professor, I'm talking you have 50 pages of information, and this is the clip, but that's not why I'm showing it to you. It's because this was a seminal experience of me working in public schools, working with educators. We are only 8,000 child psychiatrists in the country. There are only 100 of us who spend full, you know, 20 hours a week working with schools and teachers, 100 of us, and there are 80,000 public schools. So if any of you are thinking about child psychiatry and want to do schoolwork, I've often mentored folks and, you know, um, feel passionate about that. I'm doing an ACAP Institute this fall on threat assessments, and we lose 25% of our teachers. 25% of our teachers who are in their first 5 years, and predominantly we lose them because they lose the spirit of the teaching. So here's just a brief. Raise your hand, Desiree, if you can't hear it. But
shot right in the heart. Wait, hold on one second. If you got shot in your heart, what would happen? First it hit your lungs. First it hit your lungs. Before it hit your heart, it hit your lungs. Has anybody ever seen anyone get shot? One at a time. It was a party in the park, and the men had masks on. They came in and stole all the radio, and they shot some of the people. Carlos, what did you see? This lady, she had a gun with her, and somebody tried to come by her and take her money, and she shot him. And then you were watching that? I was watching it from my window, my arch window. Sometimes the kids come in wired, you don't know what happened the night before, and you can never know which kid's gonna make it. Sometimes it'll be the kid from the most troubled background, and you just have to hope that their inner strength is gonna get them there. Okay, so when I go stop share for a minute. When I do in services, I ask teachers, okay, what do you take away from this? And I think I'm more sensitized, educated about the systemic barriers. I'm sitting there at 23 talking about, you never know what inner strength is going to help people get through. And I think that's definitely true. And I also think, of course, we've all been well aware of it in the last 2 years, that there are systemic barriers and systemic racism that impact how our children make progress and how much opportunity and hope they feel. So my drive in working with educators is to instill in them a passion about working with traumatized kids and bringing insight and concrete steps. So, um, you know, uh, I wrote the behavior code, which is about, and the language I use when I tell you this is used for teachers because I got to get them in the door. I think, but let me just tell you the top. So it's the behavior code. Wait a sec, I pulled it. It's not an advertisement, just to show you. There it is, the behavior code, a practical guide to understanding and teaching the most challenging students. And it was talking, oh, sorry, I pulled it too quick, Alec. There you go. Can you see it now? Um, uh, and it's was about working with kids with oppositional behavior, anxious behavior, sexualized behavior, and withdrawn behavior. And even the language oppositional, I don't buy myself. I think you can't have opposition unless you've got someone else holding the rope and pulling it against you, right? If you drop the rope, you don't have opposition. But this was my way of being able to start where some of the teachers were willing to hear me and then try to move them forward. So I also worked in a school. I think of the community as my sort of long-term uh, psychoanalytical patient or something like that. That they're telling me what they need to where are their questions and how can I work with them to figure out how to answer it. So initially, when I was coming out of child fellowship, I worked on an advising program. Advising means um, you what we know in education is if you can have one committed adult who is connected to a student, that can make an incredible difference in their trajectory. So it was taking 2,000 kids and um, dividing them up into groups of 12 with one teacher, and having and I worked as a child fellow training, and worked for 5 years after child fellow training the teachers with how do they build relationships with kids. And um, a lot of times you'll see, if any of you have been in education, and sometimes, I've worked with people who have been teachers and then gone to medical school. In fact, I have, I don't know if you can find it on my website. If you look under COVID, I wrote an article with Laura Tharabadu, who's a graduating fourth year med student from Tufts, who's going into psychiatry. And it was all on dancing with the pandemic anxiety and how to think about that with educators. And um, so um, how that shaped me in terms of what the kinds of questions the community has asked me. First, it was a lot of times, and again, you guys might know this, educators are like the flavor of the month. They grab onto something and it's the new thing. So for 10 years, it was ADHD. For another 5 years, it was bipolar. I think we're right now about, this may be the moment for trauma. Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey, if you guys haven't listened to the tape on Audible, I went to listen to it with some trepidation because I hate books with two authors, even if it's mine. And but Bruce Perry knocks it out of the park, and he's a real role model. You guys should try to get him, but he's pretty popular right now. He's a child psychiatrist who's devoted his life to trauma and really looking at the neurodevelopmental basis. But he's so accessible on this Audible. You come away, I mean, I've been teaching about trauma to educators for 23 years, and I'm listening to this, and I was learning new kinds of information that really blew my socks off. So I would so advising was one of the things where I spent 8 years of my life trying to kind of build curriculum, support schools with how to do this, because um, just to give you a sense of how the community teaches you, when we set up advising for 2,000 kids, the biggest worry that adults had was that there would be silence, that they would get, I mean, that kids would, sorry, I told you the punchline, that kids would open up and talk about their lives in so much detail that they convinced me to call the Department of Children's Services and set up a hotline. And what ended up happening was it was actually silence that happened. A lot of adults came in a public school setting, like, am I going to trust this person? No way. I'm going to, you're going to have to earn my trust. So that's the kind of thing with advising. And then Columbine, which was in 1999, happened, April 19th. And the director of special ed said to me, I need your help with really complicated cases, and particularly those cases, which is what the data shows us, right? Actually, schools are safer places to be than most anywhere. More kids get killed in the home or in parking lots, and we still go to Whole Foods or wherever else we like to shop. And so but the perception was post Columbine is schools are really dangerous, and and again, I have a whole institute on this, but she was saying to me, I need your help. And this was prior to the Safe School Initiative, which is the FBI and Department of Ed collaboration, and prior to Dewey Cornell, who, if any of you guys are interested in schools, is absolutely brilliant work. And so I began to work with schools and have worked for the last 25 years thinking about what people like to call threat assessments. I call safety assessments, because I think we already approach kids with danger when we call it a threat assessment. And that's where I've trained child fellows and child psychiatrists, both locally and nationally, to try to engage us in providing support so kids don't get marginalized or expelled. And so that's been another piece of my work. So that's just to say, whatever you end up going into, internal medicine, child psychiatry, I think being able to embed yourself in the lives of where kids or adults are is really important. And for me, I felt like schools, from that seminal experience when I worked in Harlem, that's where kids' lives are, is in schools. And if I can help shape them by either impacting kids or impacting educators, that's super meaningful to me. So um, the the second piece of this part I want to talk to you all about, and I'm probably going to give you more time to talk because I could already tell that you all had great questions, is that hold on, I'm just checking my, I wrote a memoir. It was in 2012, and it was called, hold on, this again, Show and Tell, although it's a little more personal. It's called In Her Wake, a child psychiatrist explores the mystery of her mother's suicide. And it is publishing, trying to figure out what was my own adult narrative about what had happened. Uh, and have her sort of, and have my mother come across alive across time. And I wanted I wanted to share this with people, and I can tell you some of a little bit about the impact of it. But you know, I wanted people to. It wasn't a self-help guide. It's really a way of trying to say this was my exploration of trying to make sense of a tragedy, and hopefully, that many people who are suicidal, they think that they're a burden and that no one will really care if they're not in this world. And that this was my message to people, that they're that we are all loved, and that was that. And just the details of it, I was the youngest of 6 kids, and there had been a protracted custody battle back in, now almost 50 years ago. And uh, so I'm going to briefly, just because Desiree asked me to, read you a little piece from my from the memoir. This piece is, I wanted you to see, uh, in my clinical experience as a child fellow, because you guys, if you go into psychiatry or go into child psychiatry, yes, hope so, um, will sometimes it's really hard to know, well, what actually happens in the room and how do you manage that. So this is just real brief. It's only 3 paragraphs, but it's just to give you a sense of, all of us, not to be intrusive, but have experienced probably some loss. And psychiatry is a very evocative field where you kind of, if you want to bring a lot of meaning to it, I think you have to do your own inventory and your own, not in a self-absorbed way, but bring reflection on your own experiences so you can be more open and available to your patients. So this is just a little snapshot of that from Inner Wake. I was too young to have any sound preparation for my mother's death. Ironically, without me ever mentioning my effort to understand my mother's suicide to my patients, I've come to see that the act of examining the loss has given me a certain stamina with my patients so that I do not flinch as I did in the early days of therapy. When I started my training in child psychiatry, we observed a play therapy case through a one-way mirror. The patient was a 4-year-old girl whose father had killed himself. Afraid that the work would stir up my own confusing memories, I watched with absolute dread when this petite, pigtailed girl with a tendency to bite her lip nervously entered the crowded playroom with its dollhouse, furry puppets, and a sink full of water toys. She grabbed a large plush crocodile and stuffed its gaping mouth with plastic dolls. Then she slammed the crocodile on the floor, delighted when the dolls came tumbling out. Almost immediately, she gathered up the dolls again, this time pretending to flush the dolls down the toilet while singing London Bridge is falling down, we all fall down. Session after session, she hid the dolls and the crocodile and then threw them all to the ground. Sometimes she would stand listlessly, arms at her sides, or stare sideways into the one-way mirror as if she could see us. At times, her play disintegrated, and she would angrily throw toys around the room and yank puppets off the therapist's hands, and then retreat into corner, collapsing into tears. I watched as a therapist quietly witnessed the girl's combustible emotions, and then offered words to the girl to help her order her chaos. It was unsettling for me as I watched this girl, but now, over time, I can make the plunge when my patients choose to share something painful with me. And I mean, that's a tall order, right? Guys have been like, I might actually, and maybe someday we'll be invited to be able to be in the same room with you, but we've all been asked to have a lot of stamina. And I find my patients really inspire me. And it's very, uh, it's very humbling, just 2 days ago, Saturday, I, um, I walked in and I was wearing a mask and, th- well, it's a side story. Forget it. If you want me to tell you a story again, I'll tell you. But I just want to I want to think with you guys about bearing witness, because I think a lot of times when we think about our work, and certainly I can say this as a parent, I have 3 grown kids, and I've worked a lot with parents of especially mostly teenagers, but so many times we want to fix things and we go into act-in mode. And really what I would encourage you all as you're going onto the clinics, and this is sent to you, Kylie, is be with your patients, being with your present patients and bearing witness as 3rd-year med students. For some of you who are going into your 3rd year's rotation, that is the biggest gift. I remember, and I don't know if this is true for you, Cecile, but I remember many of my 3rd-year patients 25 years later, because those are the patients that we take the most time with, and we give of ourselves, and we don't have all the sort of I mean, we have a lot of busy work, but it's different than sort of having to move people through in fast record, and that is a true gift. So there may be times when you show up on a ward where you're feeling like, damn, I can't figure out who the secretary is. I can't figure out. I'm meeting a whole new slew of people, and they're all a little bit hierarchical. And what do I have to, what do I have to offer? And you have your presence and your sense of commitment and care, and um, that makes a big difference to our patients, I think. So I wanted to just briefly show, I'm transitioning a little bit, just I know I'm jumping around a little bit. I just drove across the country because I do virtual, and but I wanted to show you uh, again, saying, how does the community lead you? So when the pandemic happened, the Boston Catholic schools called me, um, which is good because I think I was praying a lot. I didn't know, March 2019. And they said, will you do me a favor? This is the like, it's not the nun, but it was someone up there in the archdiocese. And they said, our teachers, we and our parents, we want you to be able to talk about how to think about COVID and what you need to do. And I'm like, Jesus, I don't know what to do. I mean, my one of my kids actually had COVID with her wife, and I'd had them move in, and it was a scary time for all of us. But I've now done like 50 talks on dancing with pandemic anxiety. I just wanted to show it to you really quickly, not that I'm going to go through the whole talk, but just so that you get a flavor of, this was my community, and the community ended up being more expansive in terms of where people were, but that we're saying, we're scared, we're trying to make a narrative of this, we're not quite sure what to do. Can you help us, Dr. Rappaport? And me trying to keep up with what the needs of the community were. So I'm going to share my screen again. And I'm going to go to advanced, and just give me 1 second. So I'm going to whip through them, but I just want to give you a sense like what a challenge you have, right? How am I going to talk to people across like you all are? And so some of it was just doing, you know, a virtual hug, which I would give to you guys too. And the other was trying to join with people around how, you know, where were they on this roller coaster of, and so there's feeling exhausted, no longer taking small things for granted. This was about a time capsule, and it's something now where I ask folks thinking about what would you put in your time capsule, and this is a little kid. This is a whirlwind, and these were. And then I'm just going to tell you the topics and then not, you know, move from there because we have other things. But dancing with ambiguous loss was something that people found really helpful. And ambiguous loss is the idea, and you guys probably know it from having taken the boards because psychiatry, that's one of the board questions I think they like to ask. But it's that idea of, say, someone having Alzheimer's where they're physically present but spiritually struggling. And similarly, we've had a lot of ambiguous losses in COVID, like being on Zoom instead of being in person, even though it gives us flexibility. And then about the grief, really talking to people about the grief, and then answering the hard questions and talking to ourselves and kids about managing disappointment, helping our students make a meaningful narrative of this time, connecting and cultivating optimism, and accepting the things we can't control. And I just want to show you an example of when I talked, and this is a little bit of show and tell you guys, but it's like a whirlwind tour. But this is just showing all the different stages where you might have ambiguous loss or grief about the stages. So from getting married and having her mask as wiping away her tears to giving birth and having you know, being by yourself without having people in the room. Uh, and then, so this is just the one I wanted to say where it dovetails with my work, even though, you know, many times if you guys, and I hope you all have a long career, I find things stagger. So, you know, I put a lot of time after my publication of the memoir, um, talking about suicide and how to prevent suicide and talking with people who had lost someone to suicide. And so this is where dancing with the pandemic anxiety, you know, some of that wisdom from that work, if I can be so bold to say it was wisdom, got overlaid on, you know, being willing to hear the hard questions. And that's certainly something that you do a lot with families with suicide. And then here in the pandemic, again, I just want to give you guys a flavor. You know, should I get the vaccine? When will this be over? What will happen to me if you die? Why is there racism? Why is this happening? Is the world broken? Did we do something wrong? So that I'm ready to not be talking about the pandemic anymore. I'm really happy that we're getting to the place where hopefully, you know, many of us are vaccinated and we're moving in the right direction. But, you know, that was um, a, a big piece of the work that I've done recently. So sort of broad brushstroke, and then I am going to turn it into a conversation because is that okay if I do that? Uh-oh. Can you hear me?
Yes,
You can hear me?
that would be wonderful.
Okay, perfect. So just to recap, what I'd say is, at least in my career, what's been really meaningful is advocating, which, however, whether it ends up that you work individually with patients or you end up working where there are systemic barriers for patients, that's been really meaningful for me. And if you do end up going into that advocacy work, if you have an inkling for writing, it really helps because so much of these systemic barriers, I mean, I spent 23 years working in the public schools and I wrote a book and I worked with educators, you know, many educators. And I know when I leave this earth, there's still going to be some systemic problems that are not going to get solved. You know, but I got, I got a lot of meaning from it. And I hope that schools will be a little bit better when we leave. And then that idea of, at least if you go into psychiatry, I would encourage, I know there's a whole world out there, psychopharm, and psychopharm has its place, but really cultivating your own nurturing of yourself and your reflection and healing is what's really kept me engaged. And just to give you an example of that, about sort of the curiosity that I find really keeps us moving is, I recently in the last 5 years, I've gotten really interested in family therapy and have, in fact, on my run today, or one of my girlfriends was like, that should be the name of your next book, The Power of the Family, because it's so cool, the research and what it shows in terms of how families, when you give them the appropriate support, what they can do to um, to really alter the trajectory of their kids. And one of the unintended consequences of family therapy, I mean, of the pandemic for me, a good consequence is that I was given permission by my patients to tape them in family therapy sessions, which then allowed me to really get rich supervision from a colleague who could watch me versus have me present me in a way that looked good. Um, so advocacy, I think, is a huge thing. And then kind of trying to find places where you can sustain that commitment by by both having a community, and I think writing can sometimes be a form of advocacy, both in in the personal journey and in the work we do as child psychiatrists. So I would love to just kind of open it up, have a chance to hear what you all had questions, make it more, tailored to you all, because you're here, and I'm really happy you are. Thank you.